There is a stretch of ocean where the water is almost never still, not because of a storm passing through, not because of a season, because of something deeper, something baked into the geography of the planet itself. This is the Drake Passage, the narrow gap between the tip of South America and the frozen edge of Antarctica. Here the water is never calm. Water from three great oceans squeezes through this open stretch with no islands or continents to slow it down. That creates one unstoppable current, powerful enough to circle the entire planet without ever stopping. It moves more water every second than all the rivers on Earth combined. Ships don't just sail across still water here. They're riding inside a giant system that's already churning and shifting non-stop. Even on a clear day, the sea feels alive and restless. Waves slam in from different directions at once, piling higher and higher with no predictable rhythm. The water stays just above freezing, cold enough that if you fell in, your body would shut down fast. Around 800 ships are believed to have sunk in these waters over the centuries, taking roughly 20,000 lives with them, and yet people still cross it. Every year, willingly. Some go for adventure, others go for science. It's the shortest way to reach Antarctica, and skipping it would mean much longer, more expensive journeys with their own dangers. But here's what makes it truly terrifying. Even with today's satellites, forecasts, and advanced ships, this place stays wildly unpredictable. Storms can explode out of nowhere. Giant waves appear without warning. Tonight, we're heading straight into the heart of the Drake Passage to uncover why it remains the deadliest stretch of water on Earth. Now, let's set sail into one of the most unforgiving waters on the planet. Far to the south, where the last edges of land begin to loosen their hold, the world opens into a passage that feels less like a boundary and more like an unfinished seam. At one end lies the jagged tip of South America, marked by Cape Horn, where rock and wind meet in a constant exchange. At the other stretches the distant ice-bound mass of Antarctica, a continent held in silence and cold. Between them is a narrowing of space, not closed but left open, a corridor of water that binds vast oceans together without interruption. This gap is not especially wide when measured against the scale of the planet, yet it carries a significance that far exceeds its size. It forms the most direct connection between the Atlantic and Pacific, with the Southern Ocean flowing freely through it as well. Nowhere else on Earth do such immense bodies of water meet with so little resistance. There are no chains of islands, no submerged ridges rising high enough to slow the movement. The ocean passes through here as if nothing ever stood in its way. Long before any ship traced these waters, the continents themselves were arranged differently. South America and Antarctica were once joined, part of a larger southern landmass that stretched across the lower half of the globe. Over millions of years, deep forces within the Earth began to pull them apart. The crust thinned and fractured, and the slow drifting of tectonic plates widened the distance between them. What had once been solid ground gradually gave way to open sea. As the separation increased, a threshold was crossed. The gap grew wide enough for water to move continuously around the planet, linking ocean to ocean in an unbroken loop. This marked the birth of a global pathway, one that allowed currents to circle the Earth without encountering land. The opening between these two continents became the narrowest point in that vast circuit, a place where the flow would naturally concentrate. The shape of the continents on either side reinforces this effect. South America tapers downward, narrowing toward its southernmost point, while Antarctica curves upward, forming a kind of opposing arc. Together, they guide the ocean into a confined channel, not by walls, but by absence. The water is funneled between them, its movement shaped by geometry as much as by force. Beneath the surface, The seafloor carries the memory of this separation. Deep basins and ridges trace the boundaries of shifting plates, recording the gradual tearing apart of land that once fit together. These submerged features do little to hinder the water above, but they reveal the history that made this passage possible. The ocean here is not simply resting atop the earth, it is flowing through a space carved by time and motion on a planetary scale. Because the gap was never closed again, nothing interrupts the continuity that formed. The oceans remain linked, their waters able to move freely around the southern reaches of the globe. This uninterrupted pathway allows energy to travel immense distances, carried by currents that do not need to slow or turn back. What begins in one ocean can pass through this narrow stretch and continue onward, merging into a system that spans the entire planet. In this way, the passage is less a destination and more a hinge, a place where separate bodies of water become part of a single, circulating whole. Its existence is the result of ancient movements that unfolded long before human awareness, yet its presence continues to shape the behavior of the oceans today. The land on either side stands apart, and in that separation, the sea finds its freedom to move without end. There is a motion in the Southern Ocean that never completes a journey because it never needs to arrive. It simply continues, circling endlessly, guided not by destination, but by the shape of the world itself. This movement, known as the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, does not follow coastlines or bend around continents. It travels in a continuous ring, threading through open water that remains unobstructed across the entire lower portion of the planet. Unlike other currents that weave between land masses or turn back upon themselves, this one flows without interruption. It is the only current on Earth that can move completely around the globe, linking the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans into a single connected system. The absence of land allows it to maintain its direction and strength, building momentum over vast distances where nothing rises to slow it down. The energy it carries is difficult to picture in ordinary terms. Each second, an immense volume of water is set into motion, far exceeding the combined flow of all rivers that drain continents into the sea. Yet this movement is not a surface phenomenon alone. It extends deep beneath, shaping layers of water that slide over and under one another, guided by differences in temperature and density. The current becomes a vast conveyor, not just of water, but of heat, nutrients, and energy distributed across the planet. As it travels, wind presses steadily against the surface, adding force to its motion. In these southern latitudes, the winds blow with a persistence rarely interrupted by land. They stretch across open water, transferring their energy into the ocean below. The current responds, accelerating and deepening, its flow shaped by both atmospheric pressure above and the contours of the earth beneath. When this uninterrupted current encounters the narrowing between continents, its character begins to change. The open pathway that allowed it to spread wide becomes confined. Water that once moved across a broad expanse is funneled into a tighter space, increasing its speed and complexity. The current does not stop or slow, it compresses, its energy concentrating as it passes through. Within this narrowing, layers of motion begin to interact more intensely. Surface flows meet deeper currents rising from below, and subtle differences in direction become more pronounced. The water no longer moves as a single unified stream. Instead, it forms shifting patterns, where currents slide alongside one another, sometimes aligning, sometimes opposing. The result is not a single direction of travel, but a field of movement that constantly rearranges itself. The immense energy carried into this confined space has nowhere to dissipate easily. Without land to absorb or redirect it, the motion remains active, feeding into waves, turbulence, and shifting pressure systems within the water. Even in moments that appear outwardly calm, the underlying movement continues, a steady force that does not pause. Because the current is continuous around the planet, it also gathers influences from distant regions. Changes in wind or temperature far away can travel along its path, eventually reaching this narrow passage. By the time they arrive, they are no longer isolated events, but part of a larger connected system. The passage becomes a meeting point where these accumulated energies converge. This convergence creates a kind of instability that is not sudden but constant. The water is always adjusting, responding to forces that extend far beyond the horizon. There is no fixed pattern that settles into predictability. Instead, the movement remains fluid, shaped by interactions that shift from moment to moment. In this way, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current transforms the passage into more than a simple crossing. It becomes a place where the uninterrupted motion of the global ocean is compressed and expressed with greater intensity. The current does not create the instability on its own, but it carries the energy that allows it to exist, sustaining a restless movement that continues without end. If one could pause the surface of this water and look closely, not at a single wave, but at all of them at once, it would reveal a layered motion, as though several different seas were passing through the same place at the same time. Each rise and fall belongs to a different origin, a different moment in the past, yet they coexist here, overlapping without ever blending into a single pattern. Waves are not fixed shapes that remain where they are formed. They are moving expressions of energy, traveling across the ocean while the water itself shifts only slightly in place. When wind presses across a distant region, it transfers energy into the surface, forming waves that begin to move outward. Once created, these waves continue long after the wind has faded, carrying their motion across open water with remarkable persistence. As these traveling swells move through the world's oceans, they spread and separate according to their size and speed. Longer waves move faster and outrun shorter ones, stretching the original disturbance into a sequence of rolling forms. By the time they reach this southern corridor, they have become organized into smooth, powerful undulations, each one carrying energy that has been conserved over vast distances. Yet, they do not arrive alone. At any given moment, multiple groups of swells are passing through, each generated by different weather systems, each following its own path across the planet. Some approach from far to the west, others from distant southern reaches, and still others from directions that shift subtly over time. The surface becomes a meeting place for these separate histories, all arriving without coordination. Because these wave systems differ in length, speed, and direction, they do not align neatly. Instead, they pass through one another, sometimes reinforcing, sometimes diminishing, always changing the shape of the surface in ways that are difficult to anticipate. A gentle rise from one swell may coincide with the crest of another, lifting the water higher. Moments later, their phases may oppose, flattening the surface briefly before the next interaction begins. This constant interaction prevents the sea from settling into a stable rhythm. There is no single dominant pattern that persists long enough to define the surface. Instead, the motion remains in flux, shaped by the shifting relationships between waves that were never connected at their origin. The ocean here behaves less like a single system and more like a continuous layering of many. In regions bordered by land, incoming swells are often interrupted, reflected, or dissipated before they can accumulate. Coastlines absorb and scatter wave energy, creating intervals where the surface can gradually smooth out. In this open southern expanse, that process rarely occurs. The absence of barriers allows each incoming wave to pass freely, adding its motion to what is already present. Because of this, there is no true interval of rest. The ocean does not experience a moment where all wave energy has faded before new energy arrives. Instead, the arrival of one set of swells overlaps with the presence of others, creating an unbroken sequence of motion. Even as one pattern diminishes, another is already in place, maintaining the continuous rise and fall of the surface. The passage becomes a point where these overlapping motions are not only present, but intensified by confinement. Waves that have traveled across entire ocean basins converge into a narrower space, increasing the likelihood of interaction. The surface reflects this complexity, never repeating itself in the same way, always shaped by the combination of influences arriving from afar. In this layered and uninterrupted movement, calmness is not something that has been disturbed, but something that never fully forms. The ocean remains in a state of ongoing motion, sustained by the continuous arrival and interaction of waves that carry the memory of distant winds across the entire planet. At certain moments, the surface gathers itself in a way that feels almost deliberate, as though separate motions have briefly agreed to move as one. The water rises higher than the patterns before it, not because a single force has grown stronger, but because several have aligned at once, their movements overlapping in quiet coordination. Each wave that passes through carries its own timing, its own spacing between crest and trough. These rhythms rarely match, and most of the time they pass through one another without forming anything unusual. Yet there are instances when the peaks of different wave trains arrive together. In that instant, their energies combine, lifting the surface beyond what any one of them could produce alone. This process, often described as constructive interference, does not require rare conditions. It emerges naturally from the constant presence of multiple wave systems moving through the same region. The ocean here is already layered with motion from many directions, and within that complexity, moments of alignment occur again and again, each one temporary, each one shaped by chance and timing. When these alignments happen, the increase in height can appear sudden. A series of moderate waves may pass, followed by another that rises noticeably higher, as though it has drawn strength from something unseen. The surrounding water does not announce the change in advance. There is no gradual buildup that signals what is about to form. The transition exists only in the instant where separate movements converge. The direction of these contributing waves adds another layer of complexity. Some approach at slight angles to one another, creating surfaces that tilt and shift rather than rise evenly. When their crests meet, the resulting wave may not move in a single clear direction. Instead, it can form a peak that feels unstable, its shape influenced by forces that are not fully aligned. Beneath this surface interaction, the energy remains in motion, continuing beyond the moment of convergence. After reaching its combined height, the wave does not hold its form. The contributing energies pass through one another and continue onward, separating again into their original patterns. The heightened crest dissolves as quickly as it formed, leaving behind no lasting structure. For vessels moving across this water, these interactions create a constantly changing environment. The surface does not present a predictable sequence of waves that can be followed or anticipated. Instead, it shifts from one pattern to another, shaped by interactions that are always in flux. A ship may rise and fall with a steady rhythm for a time, only to encounter a sudden change as waves combine in unexpected ways. The challenge lies not only in the height of these waves, but in their irregularity. When waves arrive from different directions and combine unevenly, they create motion that can push a vessel sideways, as well as upward. The forces acting on the hull change from moment to moment, requiring constant adjustment to maintain balance and direction. Even with careful observation, these patterns are difficult to interpret. The surface offers no fixed reference, no repeating sequence that can be learned over time. Each interaction is shaped by the unique alignment of waves at that moment, influenced by distant origins that remain invisible from the deck. In this environment, the ocean does not build toward a single, dominant state. Instead, it exists as a field of interactions, where waves continuously meet, combine, and separate. The result is a surface that can shift from relatively ordered motion to sudden complexity, not through external change, but through the internal dynamics of the water itself. Within this constant interplay, the sea reveals a quiet intricacy where even small differences in timing and direction can shape the movement in significant ways. The surface becomes a place where multiple histories intersect, forming patterns that appear briefly before giving way to the next arrangement, each one as transient as the moment that creates it. For long stretches, the surface seems to follow a shifting yet continuous pattern, rising and falling in layered motion, until at times a single form emerges that does not belong to what came before. It stands apart, higher and steeper, as though the surrounding sea has briefly gathered its energy into one concentrated expression before releasing it again. These are often called rogue waves, though the name suggests something separate from the ocean that produces them. In reality, they arise from the same interactions already unfolding across the surface, shaped by the meeting of wave systems that happen to align in a precise and uncommon way. Their rarity comes not from a different cause, but from the exactness of the conditions required for them to form. Within the constant movement of overlapping swells, there are moments when several waves converge with nearly matching phases and directions. Instead of passing through one another in partial alignment, their crests coincide more completely, allowing their energies to combine with unusual efficiency. The result is a wave that can rise to twice the height of those surrounding it, its profile sharper and more defined. This amplification is brief, yet it carries a distinct presence. The wave does not grow gradually from the background pattern. It appears within it, shaped by the convergence of energies that were already in motion. For a short interval, it holds together as a single, elevated form before the contributing waves continue on their paths and the surface returns to its layered state. In regions where wave interactions are constant and varied, the likelihood of such alignments increases. The Southern Ocean has long been a place where these events have been observed and recorded, not as isolated anomalies, but as part of a broader system of wave behavior that allows for occasional extremes. Reports from vessels crossing these waters have described sudden walls of water rising from an otherwise irregular sea, their scale exceeding what was expected from the surrounding conditions. Modern measurements have confirmed these accounts. Instruments placed on ships and offshore structures have captured waves that exceed the average height by a significant margin, appearing without a corresponding change in local wind or weather. These observations reveal that the ocean can produce localized extremes through internal dynamics alone, without the need for an external trigger at that moment. The shape of these waves contributes to their impact. They often rise with a steep face, reducing the time available for a vessel to respond. Unlike longer, rolling swells that allow for gradual adjustment, a rogue wave can present a sudden incline, followed by a rapid descent. The transition from trough to crest occurs over a shorter distance, increasing the force exerted on anything in its path. Their direction can also differ from the dominant motion of the surrounding sea. Because they form from the interaction of multiple wave systems, their orientation may not align with the prevailing pattern. This can create a crossing force where a vessel already adjusting to one set of waves encounters another from an unexpected angle, compounding the motion. Despite their intensity, these waves remain part of the ocean's continuous behavior. They do not leave a trace once they have passed, and they do not signal that another will follow. Each one is the result of a unique convergence, shaped by timing, direction, and energy that align only briefly before dispersing again. Within the broader movement of the sea, rogue waves represent moments where the underlying complexity becomes visible in a single form. They reveal how the interaction of many small influences can produce a sudden and significant change, not through external disruption, but through the natural dynamics of a system that is always in motion. Across open water, wind does more than pass over the surface. It lingers, presses, and transfers its motion into the sea below, shaping the surface through repeated contact. The longer this contact continues without interruption, the more energy is given, and the more the water begins to respond in organized, growing forms. This uninterrupted distance over which wind travels is often described as fetch. It is not a fixed boundary, but a measure of how far the wind can move across water while continuing to add energy. When this distance is short, waves remain limited, their growth constrained by the brief interaction. When the distance stretches across vast expanses, the effect becomes cumulative. Each moment of contact builds upon the last, allowing waves to increase in size, length, and strength. In the southern reaches of the planet, the arrangement of land allows this process to unfold with remarkable continuity. Winds move across long, open stretches of ocean, encountering little that would slow or disrupt them. As they travel, they maintain their direction and speed, steadily transferring energy into the water. The surface responds by forming waves that grow not only higher but longer, with greater spacing between crests. As these waves develop, they begin to move at speeds that allow them to stay in phase with the wind that created them. This alignment is significant. When the speed of the wind matches the speed of the waves, the transfer of energy becomes more efficient. The wind continues to push along the same moving surface, reinforcing it rather than passing over it. The waves do not outrun their source, and the source does not move beyond them. This relationship creates conditions where wave growth can continue over extended distances. The ocean becomes a surface where energy is not only introduced, but sustained and amplified. Each passing moment adds to the structure already forming, allowing waves to reach sizes that would not be possible in more confined regions. In the narrowing between continents, these fully developed waves arrive already carrying significant energy. Yet the process does not end there. The same winds that shaped them across distant stretches continue to act upon them within this confined space. The alignment between wind and wave persists, allowing reinforcement to continue even as the waves enter a region where interactions become more complex. Because the surrounding land does not interrupt the flow of air, the winds remain consistent in both direction and strength. They sweep across the passage with little variation, maintaining the conditions that favor continued energy transfer. The surface is not given a chance to disperse what it has gained. Instead, it is continually supplied with new energy, layered onto what is already present. This constant reinforcement affects not only the height of the waves, but their structure. Longer wavelengths and greater energy create forms that carry momentum more deeply through the water. The motion extends downward, influencing layers beneath the surface and contributing to a more unified movement between air and sea. Within this alignment, the ocean and atmosphere become closely linked systems. The wind shapes the waves, and the waves, in turn, influence how the wind continues to transfer its energy. Small changes in speed or direction can alter this balance, but in this region, the conditions often remain stable enough to sustain the interaction over long periods. The result is a surface that is continuously energized, where waves are not only formed but maintained through ongoing reinforcement. The passage becomes a place where the relationship between wind and water is expressed with unusual clarity, each element responding to the other in a steady exchange. In this ongoing interaction, the sea does not simply reflect the wind that passes above it. It becomes an extension of that motion, shaped by the distance the wind has traveled and the time it has spent in contact with the water. The waves carry this history forward, their size and strength shaped by a process that continues as long as the alignment endures. In the latitudes that circle the lower half of the planet, the air itself settles into long, sweeping paths, moving with a steadiness that rarely breaks. These bands of motion, often called the Roaring Forties and the Furious Fifties, stretch across the globe in wide rings, guided by the rotation of the Earth and the contrast between cold, polar air and warmer regions to the north. Within these belts, wind is not a passing event, but a persistent presence. It flows day after day along similar paths, shaped by large-scale pressure systems that remain remarkably stable over time. The difference in temperature between the polar region and the mid-latitudes creates a strong gradient, and this contrast drives the atmosphere into motion. As the Earth turns, that motion is guided into broad, continuous streams that wrap around the southern oceans. What distinguishes these winds is not only their strength, but the environment through which they move. In the northern hemisphere, continents interrupt the flow, breaking it into segments, deflecting it, or reducing its speed. Mountains rise into its path, land masses absorb its energy, and coastlines alter its direction. In the south, the situation is markedly different. There is far less land to interfere, and what land exists remains distant from these circulating bands. Because of this, the winds maintain a continuity that allows them to build and sustain their force over long distances. They travel across open ocean with little resistance, preserving their speed and direction as they move. The absence of barriers means that once the winds are set in motion, they are not easily diminished. Instead, they continue, gathering strength through persistence rather than sudden bursts. This sustained movement exerts a constant influence on the ocean below. The surface is continually shaped by the pressure of air moving across it, receiving energy not in isolated moments, but as an ongoing transfer. The water responds by forming waves that reflect this steady input, their motion aligned with the direction of the wind that drives them. Over time, this interaction becomes deeply established. The ocean does not need to wait for new conditions to generate movement, because the conditions are already present and enduring. The wind remains, and with it, the continuous shaping of the surface. Each passing hour adds to the effect, reinforcing patterns that have already formed rather than replacing them. As these wind belts pass through the narrowing between continents, their influence becomes more concentrated. The same steady force that has traveled across vast stretches of ocean continues into this confined region, carrying with it the energy accumulated along the way. The water, already shaped by distant interactions, remains under the influence of these persistent winds which continue to press upon its surface. The strength of these winds also affects the vertical structure of the ocean. As energy is transferred downward, it influences not only the visible surface, but the layers beneath. The motion becomes more integrated, linking air and water into a system where each responds to the other. The result is not a surface that reacts briefly to passing conditions, but one that is continuously driven by a force that rarely ceases. Within these latitudes, the names given to the winds reflect their character, yet the reality is less about sudden intensity and more about endurance. The power of these belts lies in their consistency, in their ability to maintain motion over time without significant interruption. They are part of a larger atmospheric system that encircles the planet, shaping the behavior of the ocean in ways that remain steady even as individual moments pass. In this ongoing exchange between air and sea, the passage becomes a place where the influence of these winds is fully expressed. The surface carries the imprint of a force that does not pause, sustained by the open expanse through which it travels, and by the conditions that allow it to continue without end. Beneath the visible rise and fall, there is a quieter complexity, one that cannot be seen from the surface, but shapes everything above it. Water does not move here as a single body. It arrives from different origins, carrying distinct temperatures, salinities, and directions, meeting within the same space without ever fully blending into one uniform flow. The Atlantic contributes water that has traveled along its own long path, shaped by distant currents and gradual exchanges of heat. From the Pacific, another body arrives, carrying a different history, its properties altered by a separate set of winds and interactions. Surrounding them both, the Southern Ocean circulates continuously, linking these waters while maintaining its own character. When these meet within the narrowing between continents, they do not simply merge. They intersect. At first, this intersection appears subtle. The surface may still follow the patterns shaped by wind and wave, yet beneath it, layers begin to shift against one another. Water masses with different densities slide past, some sinking slightly, others rising, forming boundaries that are not fixed but constantly adjusting. These boundaries create regions where motion becomes more intricate, guided by contrasts that are invisible from above. Currents that approach from different directions begin to cross, not in straight lines, but in paths that curve and bend. The rotation of the Earth influences these movements, turning them gently as they pass through the region. Instead of flowing directly through, the water begins to twist, forming eddies and spirals that vary in size and duration. Some persist for days, others dissolve more quickly, replaced by new patterns that emerge from the same underlying interactions. This crossing of currents creates a layered system where motion occurs on multiple levels at once. Near the surface, water may move in one direction, while below it, a different flow travels at an angle, or even in the opposite direction. These layers do not remain separate. They exchange energy and momentum, influencing each other in ways that are continuous and evolving. Because each incoming current carries its own properties, the meeting point becomes a place of contrast. Differences in temperature and salinity affect how water moves, creating gradients that drive further motion. Denser water may sink, spreading along the seafloor, while lighter water remains above, shifting and adjusting as it interacts with the layers beneath. This vertical structure adds another dimension to the movement, extending the complexity beyond what can be seen at the surface. The result is a system that resists simplification. There is no single direction that defines the flow, no stable arrangement that persists long enough to become predictable. Instead, the water moves through a series of shifting patterns, each shaped by the interaction of multiple influences that change over time. For anything moving across this region, these underlying currents create forces that are not immediately visible. A vessel may appear to follow a steady path, yet beneath it, the water is moving in varying directions, applying subtle pressures that alter its course. These changes are often gradual, requiring constant adjustment to maintain direction. The complexity below also affects the surface indirectly. As currents interact and shift, they influence how energy is distributed within the water, contributing to variations in wave behavior above. The surface becomes an expression of deeper motion, shaped not only by wind and distant waves, but by the intricate system of currents moving beneath. In this convergence of oceans, the passage becomes more than a meeting point. It becomes a place where different histories of water intersect, each carrying its own momentum, each influencing the others. The motion is continuous, layered, and ever-changing, forming a dynamic system that extends from the surface down into the depths, where currents cross, twist, and reshape the flow without ever settling into stillness. A vessel moving through this region does not follow a single path across a stable surface. Instead, it enters a field of motion that presses from multiple directions at once, where forward progress becomes only one part of a more complex negotiation with the water beneath. The intended course may remain fixed on a chart, yet the forces acting on the hull shift continuously, altering how that course is maintained in practice. As waves approach from differing angles, they do not simply lift the ship upward and set it down again. They apply force along the sides, pushing laterally in ways that vary from moment to moment. A crest arriving from one direction may tilt the vessel, while another, slightly offset, adds a sideways motion that changes its orientation. These combined effects create a movement that is not aligned with the ship's forward path, requiring constant adjustment to remain on course. Beneath the surface, the currents described earlier continue their layered motion, each with its own direction and speed. As the hull moves through these shifting flows, it encounters resistance that is uneven across its length. One side may be carried slightly faster than the other, or the bow may meet a different current than the stern. These differences introduce rotational forces, causing the vessel to yaw, turning subtly away from its intended heading. To counter these influences, continuous correction is required. The rudder is adjusted, engines respond, and the ship's orientation is brought back into alignment, only for the process to repeat as new forces arise. This is not an occasional adjustment but an ongoing process, where control is maintained through constant attention rather than achieved once and held. The unpredictability of wave interactions adds another layer to this challenge. As waves combine and separate, their directions can shift abruptly. A vessel that has adjusted to one pattern may suddenly encounter a different one, where the dominant force changes orientation. The response must be immediate, yet the change itself may not be clearly visible until it is already affecting the ship's motion. This shifting environment affects not only direction but stability. When lateral forces coincide with vertical motion, the vessel experiences a rolling movement that can become irregular. Instead of a steady side-to-side motion, the roll may vary in timing and intensity, influenced by the changing interaction of waves. This irregularity makes it more difficult to anticipate how the ship will move from one moment to the next. The structure of the vessel is designed to withstand significant forces, yet the nature of these forces matters. Repeated impacts from waves, combined with twisting motions introduced by uneven pressures, place stress on the hull and internal framework. The ship does not simply rise and fall. It bends slightly as different parts respond to different forces. Over time, this continuous flexing contributes to structural fatigue, particularly when conditions persist without relief. Equipment and cargo within the vessel also respond to these movements. Items shift, restraints are tested, and systems designed for more predictable motion must adapt to conditions that vary constantly. The environment extends beyond the exterior, influencing how the ship functions as a whole. Even with modern navigation systems and stabilizing technologies, the underlying challenge remains rooted in the water itself. Instruments can measure position and motion with precision, yet they cannot remove the forces acting on the vessel. The ship must still respond physically, adjusting to a surface that does not present a consistent pattern. In this setting, control is not a fixed state but a continuous effort. The vessel moves forward, yet it is always being guided back toward its intended path, shaped by forces that act from multiple directions at once. The ocean does not oppose movement directly. Instead, it alters it, requiring constant correction as the ship passes through a space where motion is never singular and stability is always in motion. Far beneath the shifting surface, the seafloor drops away into vast open basins, where depth replaces contour and the ocean extends downward with little interruption. There are no gradual shelves rising to meet the energy above, no shallow regions to soften or disperse the motion. Instead, the water column stretches deeply, allowing movement at the surface to connect with layers far below. In many parts of the world, coastlines and continental shelves play a quiet role in shaping how waves behave. As water becomes shallower, the lower portion of a wave begins to interact with the seabed. This contact slows the base of the wave, while the upper portion continues forward, causing the wave to steepen and eventually break. Energy is lost in this process, transferred into turbulence and foam, reducing the force that continues onward. Here, that interaction rarely occurs. The depth remains sufficient to prevent waves from feeling the bottom, even as they travel across the passage. Without this contact, the structure of the wave remains intact. The motion extends downward, but it does not meet resistance that would alter its form or diminish its energy. The wave continues as a coherent movement, passing through the water column with little loss. This absence of shallow interference allows energy to persist over greater distances. Waves do not break and reform in cycles that gradually reduce their strength. Instead, they retain much of what they have carried from afar, their motion sustained by depth rather than interrupted by it. The surface reflects this continuity, shaped by forces that remain active throughout the vertical extent of the water. Beneath each passing wave, water particles follow circular paths, their motion decreasing with depth, but still present far below. In deep regions, these circular movements extend further downward before fading, linking the surface behavior to layers that remain unseen. The ocean does not separate into distinct zones of motion and stillness. Instead, movement transitions gradually, maintaining a connection between surface and depth. This connection influences how energy is distributed within the water. Without a boundary to absorb or reflect it, the energy moves freely through the column, contributing to a more unified system of motion. The surface waves are not isolated features but part of a larger structure that extends downward, shaped by the same forces that act above. In this environment, the ocean behaves less like a series of layers and more like a continuous volume where motion can pass through without interruption. The depth allows for the preservation of energy, supporting waves that remain powerful even as they travel long distances. There is no gradual weakening caused by repeated interaction with the seabed, no transition into calmer conditions as depth decreases. For vessels moving across the surface, this means the waves encountered are not diminished by hidden processes below. The forces experienced at the surface are supported by the full depth of the water beneath, giving them a consistency that reflects the absence of interference. The ocean does not soften its motion as it might near shallower regions, it maintains it. The seafloor itself, though distant, still shapes the broader system through its contours and boundaries. Deep basins and subtle ridges guide the movement of water on a large scale, influencing currents and the distribution of energy. Yet these features remain far enough below to avoid direct interaction with the passing waves, allowing the surface to retain its structure. Within this depth, the ocean holds its energy in a way that is both sustained and continuous. The surface rises and falls, but the motion is supported by a vast volume beneath, where movement persists without obstruction. The passage becomes a place where depth allows the ocean to remain fully engaged, its energy carried not only across distances, but through layers that extend far below what can be seen. Temperature here is not a background detail, but an active presence, shaping how water, air, and living bodies behave the moment they come into contact. The ocean holds itself just above freezing, a narrow margin where liquid persists only because of salt and constant motion. Beneath that surface, the cold is steady and unyielding, extending through the water column without relief. When exposed directly, the human body reacts before thought can settle. The initial contact with near-freezing water triggers a rapid intake of breath, an involuntary response that can disrupt controlled breathing. Muscles tighten, and the body shifts into a state where maintaining coordination becomes more difficult. This immediate reaction, often described as cold shock, occurs within seconds, altering the ability to move and respond with precision. As exposure continues, the body begins to lose heat at a rate far exceeding what it can produce. Water conducts heat away much faster than air, drawing warmth from the skin and deeper tissues. The temperature of the body starts to fall, not gradually in a way that can be easily adapted to, but steadily as the surrounding environment continues to absorb energy. Within minutes, fine motor control begins to diminish. Hands lose dexterity, making simple actions more challenging. Larger muscle groups follow, and movement becomes slower and less coordinated. The body attempts to conserve heat by redirecting blood flow away from the extremities, prioritizing vital organs. This response preserves core function for a time, but it also accelerates the cooling of limbs. As the core temperature continues to drop, the body enters a state of hypothermia. Shivering may begin as an effort to generate heat, though this response cannot fully compensate for the ongoing loss. Over time, even this mechanism weakens. The ability to think clearly becomes affected, and awareness narrows as the body focuses on maintaining essential functions. The timeline of these changes is compressed by the conditions. In water close to freezing, significant loss of function can occur within a short span, and the progression from initial exposure to severe impairment unfolds more quickly than in milder environments. The cold does not act in isolation. It interacts with movement, fatigue, and the surrounding conditions, each factor contributing to the overall effect. The influence of low temperature extends beyond direct exposure. On the surface, where waves carry spray into the air, water can settle onto structures and begin to freeze. As droplets land on decks, railings, and equipment, they form thin layers of ice that accumulate over time. Each new layer adds weight, altering the balance of the vessel and affecting how it moves through the water. This buildup can change the distribution of mass, raising the center of gravity and making the ship more susceptible to rolling. Surfaces become less stable underfoot, and mechanical components may operate less efficiently as ice forms around them. The process is gradual yet persistent, shaped by continuous exposure to cold air and water. The surrounding atmosphere contributes to this effect. Air temperatures near the surface often remain low enough to sustain freezing, especially when combined with wind that carries moisture across exposed areas. The interaction between water and air creates conditions where freezing is not an isolated event, but an ongoing process. Within this environment, temperature becomes a defining factor in how both living and mechanical systems function. It influences response times, physical capabilities, and structural conditions, shaping the experience of anyone or anything that moves through these waters. The cold is not simply present, it participates, affecting outcomes in ways that are constant and unavoidable. In this narrow band above freezing, the ocean maintains its fluid state, yet everything that touches it must contend with the energy it draws away. The balance between motion and temperature defines the nature of this place, where even brief contact with the water introduces a process that continues as long as exposure remains. Not all of what moves through these waters is immediately visible. Some forms travel slowly, carried by currents that guide them far from their origin, appearing only as quiet shapes against the horizon or, at times, not appearing at all. Among these are icebergs, fragments of a distant continent that have broken away and begun a gradual journey northward. Their presence begins far to the south, where massive shelves of ice meet the ocean and release pieces that drift free. Once separated, these formations become travelers, shaped by wind and current as they move into regions where open water replaces the frozen edge they once bordered. Their pace is steady, governed not by urgency but by the same forces that move the surrounding sea. As they enter the passage, they bring with them a structure that extends well beyond what can be seen. Only a small portion rises above the surface, often appearing as a low, pale form that contrasts with the darker water. Beneath it, a much larger mass remains submerged, hidden from view, extending downward and outward in irregular shapes. This imbalance between what is visible and what lies below creates a form of uncertainty. The surface offers only a partial indication of the iceberg's true size and reach. Edges that seem distant may extend further than expected, and the submerged portions can vary in shape, influenced by melting and interaction with the water. Each iceberg carries a geometry that is not immediately apparent, changing as it moves. Visibility in this region can shift quickly, influenced by weather and light. Fog can settle over the surface, softening outlines and reducing contrast. Low clouds and diffuse light can make distant objects blend into the surrounding environment, making it difficult to distinguish ice from water. Even in clearer conditions, the scale of the ocean can make smaller ice formations appear less significant than they are. These smaller fragments, often called growlers or bergy bits, present their own challenges. They may rise only slightly above the surface, their shapes irregular and their presence subtle. Yet beneath them, dense ice extends downward, capable of interacting with anything that passes nearby. Their low profile makes them difficult to detect, especially when waves and surface motion obscure their outlines. As icebergs drift, they do not remain static in form. The ocean acts upon them continuously, eroding edges, creating fractures, and altering their balance. Pieces may break away, forming new fragments that continue on their own paths. The process is gradual, yet it introduces variability into the environment, adding new elements that were not present before. The movement of these ice formations is not independent of the surrounding system. Currents guide them, winds influence their direction, and waves shape their surfaces. They become part of the larger motion, carried along while also interacting with it. Their presence adds another layer to the complexity of the passage, introducing solid forms into a space defined largely by fluid motion. For those navigating these waters, the challenge lies in the combination of visibility and structure. The ocean's surface may reveal only a portion of what is present, requiring careful observation and awareness of what cannot be seen directly. The interaction between water and ice creates a dynamic environment where conditions can change without clear indication. Within this setting, icebergs move quietly, their progress measured in distance rather than speed. They carry with them the history of their origin, shaped by processes that began far to the south, now continuing through a region where their presence must be accounted for, despite the limited information available at the surface. Distance shapes every outcome in this region, not as an abstract measure on a map, but as a real delay between need and response. The passage lies far from major ports and established routes, positioned at the edge of regular human activity. Vessels that cross here do so with planning and purpose, yet they remain separated from one another by wide stretches of water that are rarely crowded. When an incident occurs, the first challenge is simply being known. Communication must travel outward, carried by radio or satellite, moving across space before reaching another vessel or a distant coordination center. Even with modern systems, this exchange takes time, and the information received may be incomplete, shaped by conditions that affect both transmission and clarity. Once the need is recognized, the question of proximity becomes central. There are few ships in the immediate vicinity, and those that are present may already be engaged in their own passage, moving along paths that do not intersect easily. Altering course in such an environment is not a simple adjustment. It requires navigating the same forces that define the region, often at reduced speed to maintain control. The nearest assistance may be many hours away, sometimes longer, depending on location and conditions. During that time, the situation continues to evolve. The ocean does not pause while help is arranged. Waves continue their motion, winds maintain their influence, and the underlying currents shift the position of both the vessel in need and those attempting to reach it. As responders move closer, the environment itself becomes a limiting factor. The same forces that challenge navigation also affect the ability to conduct rescue operations. Approaching another vessel requires precision, yet the surface rarely offers the stability needed for close maneuvers. Maintaining position alongside a moving object becomes difficult when both are influenced by changing motion from multiple directions. Launching smaller craft introduces additional complexity. Boats designed for short-distance travel must contend with waves that can vary in height and direction, making deployment hazardous. The transition from a larger vessel to a smaller one is not a smooth transfer, but a moment where timing and coordination must align with conditions that are constantly shifting. Helicopter operations, when available, face their own constraints. Strong winds and variable air currents affect stability, while the moving surface below provides no fixed reference point. The act of lowering or lifting individuals requires careful control, yet the environment introduces motion that cannot be fully predicted or eliminated. Cold conditions add another layer to the difficulty. Equipment may operate differently at low temperatures, and exposure affects both those in need of rescue and those providing it. Time becomes a critical factor, not only because of distance, but because of how quickly conditions can influence the human body and mechanical systems. Visibility can also change without gradual transition. Fog, low clouds, or precipitation may reduce the ability to locate and approach a vessel, even when its position is known. Instruments assist in navigation, Yet the final stages of a rescue often rely on visual confirmation, which may be limited or obscured. In this setting, coordination extends beyond a single vessel. Multiple parties may become involved, each operating within the same challenging conditions, attempting to align their efforts across distance and time. Communication must remain clear and continuous, even as the environment affects how information is exchanged. The passage does not prevent rescue, but it reshapes how it unfolds. Every step, from initial contact to final assistance, is influenced by factors that extend beyond human control. Distance, motion, temperature, and visibility combine to create a process that requires patience, precision, and adaptation, unfolding within a space where response is always measured against the conditions that surround it. Before charts were complete and routes became familiar, this stretch of ocean was encountered as an unknown expanse, approached by vessels built from wood and driven entirely by wind. The earliest crossings were not guided by precise instruments or detailed forecasts, but by observation, experience, and a gradual understanding of patterns that could not always be trusted to remain consistent. Navigation relied on the position of the sun during the day and the stars at night when they could be seen. Sailors measured angles with simple tools, estimating their location across a moving surface that offered no fixed reference points. Clouds often obscured the sky, and the motion of the ship itself made steady measurement difficult. Position was inferred rather than confirmed, shaped by calculations that carried a margin of uncertainty. The ships themselves responded directly to the wind, their sails catching whatever movement the air provided. Progress depended on aligning the vessel with prevailing winds, adjusting sails and rigging to capture as much force as possible. Yet the wind did not always cooperate. It shifted in strength and direction, sometimes allowing forward movement, other times forcing the ship to change course or slow its advance. In these southern latitudes, the wind rarely softened, but its intensity brought its own challenges. Strong gusts placed strain on masts and sails, requiring careful handling to prevent damage. Crews worked continuously, adjusting lines, reefing sails to reduce surface area, or expanding them when conditions allowed. The relationship between ship and wind was constant, each movement of air requiring a response from those on board. The journey itself extended over long periods, measured not in hours but in days and weeks. Without engines, there was no independent control over speed. The ship moved as conditions permitted, sometimes making steady progress, at other times slowed by opposing forces. Supplies had to be managed carefully, as the duration of the crossing could not be predicted with precision. The ocean presented a surface that was rarely uniform. Waves approached from varying directions, influenced by distant conditions that were unknown to those on board. The ship rose and fell, rolled and pitched, its motion shaped by patterns that changed without clear indication. Maintaining stability required constant attention as the vessel responded to forces that could not be fully anticipated. Without modern communication, each crossing was largely isolated. There was no immediate way to share information or receive updates from other ships. Knowledge of these waters developed gradually, passed from one voyage to the next through logs, accounts, and shared experience. Each journey added to a growing understanding, yet that understanding remained incomplete. The lack of detailed maps added another layer of uncertainty. Coastlines and hazards were not always precisely recorded, and the open ocean offered few landmarks to guide navigation. Sailors relied on their skill and judgment, interpreting the behavior of wind, waves, and currents to determine their path. Despite these challenges, crossings continued, driven by necessity as much as by exploration. Trade routes and the movement of goods required passage through these waters, and the risks were accepted as part of the journey. Ships set out with the knowledge that conditions could change without warning, and that their ability to respond would depend on the coordination and experience of the crew. Over time, patterns were observed and recorded, contributing to a more refined understanding of the region. Yet, even as knowledge grew, the fundamental nature of the passage remained unchanged. The forces encountered by early sailors were the same ones that continue to shape the ocean today, encountered then without the support of modern technology, navigated through skill, endurance, and an ongoing adaptation to a sea that did not follow a single, predictable course. Trade once moved along paths defined not by preference, but by necessity, shaped by the arrangement of continents and the limits of available routes. Goods traveled between oceans by following the only passages that existed, and for ships moving between the Atlantic and the Pacific, the southern tip of the Americas became an unavoidable turning point. Before an artificial connection was cut through Central America, there was no direct way to pass between these oceans at lower latitudes. Land stood as a continuous barrier, and the narrow isthmus that would later be crossed by a canal remained intact. Ships could not pass through it, and so they were required to navigate around it, following a much longer arc that led into colder, more demanding waters. This route was not chosen for its conditions, but for its necessity. Trade networks expanded across continents, linking regions that depended on the movement of goods for economic stability. Materials, food, and manufactured items were carried along these routes, forming connections that supported entire economies. The demand for these exchanges did not diminish because of distance or difficulty. It persisted, driven by the needs of growing societies. For vessels engaged in this trade, the decision to cross these waters was not framed as an optional risk, but as part of the journey itself. The route represented the most direct connection available, even if it introduced challenges that were widely known. To avoid it would require alternative paths that extended travel time significantly, increasing the cost of transport and the strain on supplies. The economic pressures behind these voyages were substantial. Ships carried cargo that represented value not only in its material form, but in its expected arrival. Delays could affect markets, disrupt supply chains, and influence the balance of trade between regions. The movement of goods was tied to schedules that, while flexible in the face of uncertainty, still required progress to be maintained. Crews and ship owners understood the conditions they would encounter, yet the structure of trade left little room to bypass them. The route around the southern continent remained the primary connection between two vast ocean systems, and so it was used repeatedly, becoming a regular part of maritime activity despite its reputation. Over time, knowledge of these waters increased, allowing for more informed preparation. Sailors learned to anticipate patterns, to adjust their timing, and approach based on experience. Yet this understanding did not remove the fundamental challenges. It allowed for better navigation within them, but the conditions themselves remained consistent. The absence of an alternative meant that these crossings became embedded within the broader system of global trade. Ships departed with the expectation that they would pass through this region carrying goods that connected distant markets. The risks were accounted for as part of the process, weighed against the necessity of maintaining these links. This balance between economic need and environmental difficulty shaped the character of these voyages. Decisions were made not in isolation, but within a network of demands that extended beyond any single journey. The route existed as a fixed element within that network, influencing how trade was conducted and how ships were designed and operated. When the possibility of a canal later emerged, it represented a shift in how these connections could be maintained. Yet before that change, the Southern Passage stood as the primary gateway between oceans, used not because it offered ease, but because it provided access. The ships that crossed it did so as part of a larger system, one where movement was required, and the available path, however demanding, was the one that had to be taken. Steel replaced wood, engines replaced sails, and navigation shifted from estimation to precise positioning, yet the relationship between vessel and ocean remains shaped by the same physical forces. Modern ships enter this passage with advanced systems that monitor movement, calculate position, and assist in maintaining stability. But these systems operate within an environment that continues to impose its own conditions. Large hulls are designed to withstand significant stress, their structures reinforced to handle impact and flex under pressure. Engines provide consistent propulsion, allowing ships to maintain forward motion independent of wind direction. Stabilization systems reduce rolling by counteracting motion through internal mechanisms or external fins. These developments change how ships respond, but they do not remove the forces acting upon them. Waves continue to interact with the hull in ways that reflect their size, direction, and timing. A larger vessel may span multiple wave crests at once, experiencing forces along its length rather than at a single point. The bow may rise on one wave while the stern remains in a trough, creating a bending motion that places stress along the structure. This interaction, often referred to as hogging and sagging, occurs repeatedly as the ship moves through varying wave patterns. The scale of modern ships introduces its own considerations. While greater mass can provide a degree of inertia, reducing the effect of smaller waves, it also means that when larger forces are encountered, the impact is distributed across a larger structure. The response is not a simple reduction in motion, but a different form of interaction where the ship's size influences how it engages with the surface. Stabilization systems can moderate certain types of movement, particularly rolling caused by waves approaching from the side. These systems adjust dynamically, responding to changes in motion as they occur. Yet their effectiveness depends on the nature of the forces involved. Irregular wave patterns, shifting directions, and sudden changes in height can exceed the range within which these systems operate most efficiently. Navigation technology provides detailed information about position, speed, and heading, allowing for precise course adjustments. Radar and satellite systems offer awareness of surrounding conditions, contributing to safer passage planning. However, these tools do not alter the behavior of the ocean itself. They inform decisions, but the vessel must still respond physically to the environment it encounters. The interaction between ship and water remains governed by fundamental principles of motion and force. When waves approach from multiple directions, the resulting movement can be complex, combining vertical, lateral, and rotational components. The ship responds to each of these, adjusting through propulsion and steering, yet the underlying variability persists. Size also affects how quickly a vessel can change its response. Larger ships require more time and distance to alter course or speed, limiting the ability to react rapidly to sudden changes in conditions. This does not prevent adjustment, but it shapes the timing of those adjustments, requiring anticipation rather than immediate correction. Crew experience continues to play a role in navigating these waters. Understanding how the vessel responds under different conditions allows for more effective management of speed, heading, and onboard systems. Technology supports this process, but it does not replace the need for judgment shaped by observation and familiarity with the environment. Despite the advancements in design and capability, the passage remains a place where natural forces define the experience of travel. Modern ships are better equipped to handle these conditions, yet they remain part of the same system, interacting with waves, currents, and wind that operate independently of human intention. In this context, progress has altered the way ships move through the passage, making journeys more controlled and informed. Still, the ocean retains its complexity, and the interaction between vessel and water continues to require adaptation, shaped by forces that extend beyond the reach of technology alone. Inside the vessel, the sense of direction becomes something that must be relearned. Floors tilt without warning, then settle briefly before shifting again, creating a rhythm that does not repeat in a predictable way. The body adjusts at first through small corrections, muscles engaging to maintain balance, feet finding stability where they can. Over time, these adjustments become continuous, no longer deliberate but instinctive, shaped by a surface that never fully steadies. Walking from one end of a corridor to another requires attention, not because of obstacles, but because the path itself is moving. A step taken forward may meet a rising deck or a sudden drop, altering the weight of the body in mid-motion. Handrails become essential points of contact, offering brief moments of stability in an environment where equilibrium is always shifting. This constant motion extends into every routine. Tasks that would normally require minimal effort demand coordination and timing. Objects must be secured, movements planned with awareness of how the ship might tilt or roll. The environment reshapes simple actions, turning them into sequences that adapt to a changing frame of reference. Rest becomes affected in a different way. When the body lies down, the motion does not cease. Instead, it continues beneath and around, translating into a series of movements that pass through the frame of the bed. At times, the motion is slow and rolling, allowing the body to settle into it. At other moments, it becomes irregular, shifting direction or intensity, making it difficult to find a consistent sense of stillness. Sleep, when it comes, is often fragmented. The body responds to changes in motion even without conscious awareness, adjusting position or tensing briefly as the ship moves. These interruptions may not fully wake a person, yet they prevent the deeper, uninterrupted rest that would normally restore energy. Over time, this leads to a gradual accumulation of fatigue. The internal sense of balance, governed by the vestibular system, remains engaged throughout. Signals from the inner ear reflect the ongoing movement, sometimes aligning with what the eyes perceive, other times differing when the surroundings offer few stable visual cues. This mismatch can lead to discomfort as the body attempts to reconcile different sources of information about motion. Physical strain develops through this constant engagement. Muscles work continuously to maintain posture and balance, even during periods of relative inactivity. The effort is subtle, often unnoticed in the moment, yet it contributes to a sense of tiredness that builds over time. Energy is spent not only on tasks, but on simply remaining upright within a moving space. Mental focus is also shaped by these conditions. Concentration must be maintained despite the background of motion, requiring attention to both the task at hand and the environment in which it is performed. Decision-making continues, yet it occurs within a context that demands awareness of shifting conditions, adding a layer of complexity to routine operations. The duration of a crossing influences how these effects accumulate. Short exposures may allow for adaptation as the body begins to anticipate certain patterns. Longer periods extend the experience, making the lack of stillness a constant presence. the environment does not return to a baseline that allows full recovery. And so adjustment becomes an ongoing process rather than a completed one. Within this setting, daily life is shaped by movement that does not pause. The vessel provides structure and shelter, yet it remains part of the surrounding system, responding to forces that pass through it continuously. For those on board, the experience is not defined by a single moment, but by a sustained interaction with motion that influences both body and mind over the course of the journey. At times, the sky above this passage holds a quiet tension, a subtle shift in tone and texture that does not announce itself with clear boundaries. The air carries differences that are not immediately visible, yet they begin to reorganize the atmosphere, setting conditions that can change over short intervals. What appears stable in one moment can begin to transform in the next, guided by processes unfolding across a wide and connected region. Pressure within the atmosphere does not remain fixed. It rises and falls as air masses move and interact, creating gradients that drive motion. In these southern latitudes, the contrast between colder polar air and relatively warmer air to the north creates zones where pressure differences can become pronounced. These gradients influence wind patterns and contribute to the formation of systems that develop with a speed that can feel sudden when observed from within. As pressure begins to drop in a localized area, air moves inward and upward, initiating the early stages of storm development. Moisture carried within the atmosphere condenses as it rises and cools, forming clouds that thicken and spread. This process can accelerate as surrounding air continues to feed into the developing system, reinforcing its structure and allowing it to expand. The open nature of the ocean allows these systems to grow without interruption. There are no landforms to disrupt the circulation or reduce its intensity. The developing storm moves across a surface that offers little resistance, maintaining its organization as it travels. Wind strengthens around the pressure gradient, and the interaction between air and water intensifies, shaping both elements simultaneously. These changes do not always follow a gradual progression that can be easily observed from a single location. A vessel moving through the passage may encounter conditions that shift from relative stability to increased wind and cloud cover over a short span. The transition is not always marked by a clear sequence of stages. Instead, it reflects the arrival of a system that has been forming elsewhere, now intersecting with the ship's path. Forecasting these developments presents its own challenges. While modern systems collect data from satellites, buoys, and other observation points, the vastness of the region means that not all areas are equally monitored. Gaps in data can limit the precision of predictions, particularly when systems evolve rapidly or follow paths that diverge from expected patterns. Models used to anticipate weather rely on current information and established dynamics, yet the atmosphere remains sensitive to small variations. A slight change in temperature, moisture, or pressure can influence how a system develops, leading to outcomes that differ from earlier projections. In a region where conditions are already dynamic, these variations can have noticeable effects. Communication of forecasts also involves time, and during that interval, conditions continue to evolve. By the time information reaches a vessel, the atmosphere may have already shifted further, narrowing the gap between prediction and present reality. Crews interpret these forecasts alongside direct observation, adjusting their understanding as new conditions emerge. Cloud formations provide visual cues, yet they can change quickly, reshaping the sky in ways that reflect ongoing processes. Wind direction and strength may alter as pressure gradients shift, influencing the motion of the surface below. These changes are part of a continuous system where the atmosphere responds to forces that extend across large distances. Within this environment, weather does not arrive as an isolated event, but as part of an ongoing cycle of development and movement. Systems form, evolve, and pass through, each influenced by conditions that are themselves changing. The passage becomes a place where these processes are experienced directly, where the atmosphere reveals its variability through patterns that do not always follow a predictable path, yet remain governed by the same underlying dynamics that shape weather across the planet. Beyond the immediate motion of waves and wind, this region participates in a larger exchange that extends across the entire planet, linking distant climates through the movement of water and energy. The ocean here is not isolated within its own boundaries. It forms part of a continuous system that redistributes heat, connecting regions separated by vast distances. Water carries heat as it moves, storing energy absorbed in one place and releasing it in another. In lower latitudes, the ocean takes in warmth from the sun, holding it within its upper layers. As currents transport this water toward colder regions, that stored energy is gradually transferred to the surrounding environment. The process is not abrupt, but steady, unfolding over time as water flows through interconnected pathways. In the southern oceans, this exchange becomes part of a global circulation that links the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans into a single system. The passage serves as a conduit within this system, allowing water to move between basins without interruption. As it passes through, it carries with it the thermal properties acquired along its journey, contributing to the balance of temperatures across the planet. This movement influences not only the ocean itself, but also the atmosphere above. As heat is transferred from water to air, it affects temperature gradients that shape wind patterns. Warmer water can lead to rising air and the development of pressure differences, while cooler water influences the stability of the atmosphere. These interactions contribute to the formation and movement of weather systems that extend far beyond the region. The connection between ocean and atmosphere operates continuously, with each influencing the other in a dynamic exchange. Changes in one part of the system can propagate through the network, affecting conditions in distant locations. The passage becomes a point within this network where these interactions are particularly active, as water moving through it links multiple ocean basins. In addition to surface processes, deeper currents play a role in this global circulation. Differences in temperature and salinity influence the density of water, causing it to sink or rise in various regions. This vertical movement contributes to a larger pattern, often described as a global conveyor, where water moves through different depths before returning to the surface elsewhere. The passage participates in this system by allowing these flows to remain connected across the southern latitudes. Through this continuous movement, the ocean helps regulate the distribution of heat, preventing extreme imbalances between regions. Warmth absorbed in one area does not remain confined there. It is transported and shared, contributing to a more stable overall climate. The process is gradual and ongoing, shaped by currents that operate over long timescales. Weather patterns are influenced by these exchanges in subtle but significant ways. The position and intensity of winds, the formation of storms, and the distribution of precipitation are all connected to the underlying state of the ocean. Variations in temperature can alter these patterns, leading to shifts that may be observed far from their origin. Within this context, the passage is not defined solely by its immediate conditions. It functions as part of a broader system that connects oceans and climates across the globe. The movement of water through this region contributes to a balance that extends beyond its boundaries, linking distant environments through a shared circulation. The forces that shape this exchange operate continuously, guided by the properties of water and the structure of the Earth itself. The passage remains an open pathway within this system, allowing the flow of heat and energy to continue without interruption. In doing so, it participates in the larger processes that influence the climate of the entire planet, connecting regions that may seem distant but remain linked through the motion of the ocean. Far below the surface, beyond the reach of light, the ocean holds a quiet reserve of nutrients that have settled over long periods, drawn downward from countless cycles of life and decay. These deeper layers remain rich in dissolved minerals and organic material, preserved in cold, dense water where movement is slower and sunlight does not penetrate. On their own, these depths remain largely separate from the surface world, yet in certain regions, that separation begins to shift. Here, vertical movement becomes part of the larger circulation, bringing deeper water upward in a gradual and continuous process known as upwelling. This motion is not sudden or turbulent, but steady, guided by wind patterns and the interaction of currents that influence how water is distributed across different depths. As surface waters are displaced, they are replaced by water rising from below, carrying with it the nutrients that have accumulated in darkness. When this deeper water reaches the upper layers, it enters a different environment, one defined by light and the capacity for photosynthesis. Microscopic organisms, particularly phytoplankton, respond quickly to the availability of these nutrients. With sunlight and dissolved minerals now present together, they begin to grow, forming the foundation of a broader system of life. This growth does not remain isolated at the smallest scale. Zooplankton feed on phytoplankton and in turn become a food source for larger organisms. Fish, seabirds, and marine mammals all connect to this chain, their presence supported by the productivity that begins with these microscopic forms. The energy introduced through upwelling moves upward through the food web, linking deep ocean processes to visible life at the surface. The passage plays a role in sustaining this exchange by maintaining the conditions that allow upwelling to occur. Winds and currents interact in ways that encourage vertical movement, while the open nature of the ocean allows these processes to continue without interruption. The result is a region where nutrients are not confined to depth, but are regularly brought into the layers where life can make use of them. This connection between depth and surface adds a different dimension to the movement already present. The ocean does not only shift horizontally across distances, it also circulates vertically, linking layers that would otherwise remain separate. The upward flow of nutrient-rich water becomes part of a larger pattern, integrating biological processes with physical motion. The effects of this process can be observed in the distribution of life across the region. Areas influenced by upwelling often support higher concentrations of organisms, reflecting the availability of resources that sustain growth. These patterns may shift with changes in wind and current, yet the underlying mechanism remains consistent, driven by the interaction between surface conditions and deeper layers. In this way, the passage contributes not only to the movement of water and energy, but also to the renewal of life within the ocean. The nutrients rising from below represent a continuation of cycles that extend through time, connecting past biological activity with present growth. What settles into the depths does not remain there indefinitely. It is returned, becoming part of new processes at the surface. The ocean here functions as a system where layers are linked through motion, allowing material and energy to circulate in multiple directions. Upwelling becomes one expression of this connectivity, revealing how processes that begin far below can influence the living world above. Within this ongoing exchange, the passage supports a dynamic environment where life is sustained not only by what is visible, but by what rises quietly from the depths. In water that remains near the freezing point, life does not disappear, it adjusts. Organisms that inhabit this region exist within conditions that limit speed, reduce available energy, and shape every aspect of survival. The cold influences how quickly processes occur, how efficiently energy is used, and how each species interacts with its environment. At these temperatures, chemical reactions slow, affecting metabolism at a fundamental level. Many organisms here operate with reduced metabolic rates, conserving energy in a setting where resources can be unevenly distributed. Growth occurs more gradually, and lifespans may extend beyond what would be expected in warmer waters. The rhythm of life is measured differently, aligned with conditions that favor efficiency over rapid change. To function in such cold water, many species have developed specialized biochemical adaptations. Certain fish produce proteins that prevent ice crystals from forming within their tissues, allowing their bodily fluids to remain liquid even when temperatures approach freezing. These antifreeze compounds circulate through their systems, maintaining internal stability despite the surrounding environment. Cell membranes also adapt, altering their composition to remain flexible at low temperatures. Without these adjustments, cellular processes would become rigid, limiting the ability of organisms to function. By modifying the balance of lipids within their membranes, these species preserve the fluidity needed for essential biological activity. Movement in this environment reflects the constraints imposed by temperature. Many organisms exhibit slower, more deliberate motion, conserving energy while still maintaining the ability to feed and avoid threats. Muscles operate differently under these conditions, and the efficiency of each movement becomes more important than speed alone. Sensory systems also adjust to the characteristics of the water. Light penetration is limited, particularly during extended periods when sunlight remains low or absent. Some species rely more heavily on other forms of perception, detecting subtle changes in pressure or movement within the water. These adaptations allow them to navigate and locate food in an environment where visibility is often reduced. The structure of the ecosystem reflects these individual adaptations. Food chains may be shorter, with energy passing through fewer levels, and the relationships between species are shaped by the availability of resources. Organisms are often highly specialized, occupying niches that align with their particular adaptations to cold and limited energy. Reproduction follows patterns that account for the slower pace of life. Development may take longer, and timing becomes aligned with periods when conditions are most favorable. This synchronization ensures that offspring emerge when resources are more accessible, increasing the likelihood of survival. Despite the challenges, diversity persists. Species differ in form and function, each representing a distinct solution to the conditions present. Some remain close to the sea floor, others move through the water column, and still others interact with the surface layers, influenced by broader ocean processes. Together, they form a system that is both stable and dynamic, shaped by the interplay between environment and adaptation. The continuity of this life depends on the balance between the conditions imposed by the cold and the ability of organisms to adjust to them. The environment does not become less demanding, yet life persists by aligning itself with those demands, evolving mechanisms that allow it to function within narrow margins. In this setting, survival is not defined by overcoming the environment, but by integrating with it. Each adaptation reflects a response to temperature, pressure, and available energy, forming a network of life that operates within limits set by the surrounding conditions. The passage supports this network through processes that connect depth, surface, and circulation, allowing life to exist in a place where the cold shapes every detail of its existence. Within the drifting layers of cold water, there are moments when the sea seems to thicken, not with sediment or ice, but with life itself. Tiny bodies gather in vast numbers, moving together in slow, coordinated swarms that can extend for kilometers. These are krill, small crustaceans that form one of the most important links in the ocean's living network. Each individual is no larger than a finger, nearly transparent, carrying within it a faint shimmer as it moves through the water. Alone, it appears insignificant, yet in aggregation, the effect becomes immense. These swarms are not random clusters, but structured groups, shifting and adjusting as a single unit, guided by subtle cues in light, current, and the presence of predators. Krill feed primarily on microscopic plant life suspended near the surface. When nutrient-rich water rises and light is available, phytoplankton begin to grow, forming a thin, invisible layer of productivity. Krill move through this layer, filtering the water and capturing these tiny organisms, converting them into a form that can support larger life. In this way, they act as a bridge, transferring energy from the smallest scale to the broader ecosystem. Their role as a foundation species emerges from this position within the food web. Many larger animals depend on krill as a primary source of nourishment. Fish, seabirds, and a variety of marine mammals rely on their abundance, drawing energy from the same source that krill themselves consume. The presence of krill influences where these larger species travel, shaping patterns of movement across the region. Among the most notable of these are whales, which pass through these waters in search of concentrated swarms. Their feeding behavior is adapted to take advantage of this abundance, allowing them to consume large quantities in a single motion. Seals and penguins also depend on krill, incorporating them into their diets as part of a broader system that connects multiple levels of life. The scale of krill populations is difficult to visualize. Estimates suggest that their collective biomass ranks among the largest of any species on Earth. These vast numbers are not evenly distributed, but concentrated in regions where conditions support their growth. The passage, influenced by the processes described earlier, provides such conditions, allowing krill to gather and sustain their populations. Their life cycle is closely tied to the environment. Reproduction, growth, and movement all depend on the availability of food and the structure of the water column. Seasonal changes influence these patterns, affecting where and when krill are most abundant. Despite this variability, their presence remains a consistent feature of the ecosystem. Krill also contribute to processes that extend beyond immediate feeding relationships. As they consume phytoplankton and produce waste, they influence the cycling of nutrients within the ocean. Their movement through different depths connects surface and deeper layers, participating in the transfer of material through the water column. The survival of krill depends on a balance between environmental conditions and predation. Their large numbers provide resilience, yet they remain sensitive to changes in temperature, ice cover, and the availability of food. Shifts in these factors can influence their distribution, with effects that ripple through the entire ecosystem. Within this network, krill occupy a central position, linking the smallest forms of life to some of the largest. Their presence transforms the energy captured at the surface into a resource that supports a wide range of species. The passage becomes a place where this transformation is especially visible, where the movement of water and nutrients sustains a system built upon countless small organisms moving together through the cold, open sea. Along the shifting expanse, there are passages traced not on charts but through memory carried across generations. Whales follow these routes with a consistency that unfolds over years, moving between distant regions as part of a cycle that links feeding grounds and breeding areas. The passage becomes one segment of this journey, a space crossed not in isolation, but as part of a larger pattern that repeats across time. These movements are guided by cues that extend beyond visible landmarks. The structure of the ocean, shaped by temperature, currents, and the distribution of food, provides a framework that whales respond to with remarkable precision. They travel through open water where few fixed references exist, yet their paths remain aligned with conditions that support their needs at different stages of their lives. During certain periods, the presence of abundant prey draws them into these waters. The concentration of krill creates feeding opportunities that support the energy demands of large bodies. Whales approach these areas and adjust their behavior to take advantage of the density of food available. Their movements slow, becoming more localized as they remain within regions where feeding is most effective. The act of feeding itself reflects an adaptation to both the prey and the environment. Some species move through swarms with open mouths, filtering large volumes of water to capture small organisms. Others coordinate their movements with the behavior of krill, aligning their approach with the structure of the swarm. These actions occur within a surface that remains in motion, requiring continual adjustment as waves and currents influence position. Despite the constant movement of the sea, whales maintain a level of control over their own motion that allows them to navigate effectively. Their bodies are shaped for efficient travel through water, reducing resistance and enabling them to move with a degree of stability that differs from surface vessels. They can adjust depth, moving below the most active surface layers when needed, where motion may be less pronounced. This vertical movement becomes an important aspect of their navigation. By shifting between depths, whales can respond to changes in conditions, avoiding the most disruptive surface patterns while still remaining connected to areas where food is present. The ocean offers multiple layers, and whales use this structure to their advantage, moving through it with awareness of how conditions vary. Communication also plays a role in their movement. Sound travels efficiently through water, and whales produce vocalizations that can extend across considerable distances. These signals contribute to maintaining contact between individuals, supporting coordinated behavior during feeding and migration. The acoustic environment becomes part of the landscape they navigate, adding another dimension to their interaction with the ocean. The journey through these waters is not defined by a single crossing, but by repeated passages over time. Each migration reinforces the route, embedding it within patterns that are sustained across generations. The ocean changes continuously, yet the pathways followed by whales persist, shaped by enduring features of the environment. In this setting, the presence of whales reflects a balance between movement and adaptation. They traverse a region characterized by shifting conditions, yet they do so as part of a system that aligns their behavior with the availability of resources. Their passage through these waters connects distant parts of the ocean, linking, feeding, and breeding grounds through a route that remains active within the larger circulation of life. As they move through this space, whales become part of the broader motion already present, their journeys intersecting with currents, waves, and the distribution of organisms below. The passage serves not only as a challenge to navigate, but as a corridor that supports life on a scale that extends far beyond its boundaries. There are routes that stretch longer across the map, yet offer a different kind of certainty. Paths where distance increases, but conditions become more controlled. For some vessels, the decision is not defined by how quickly a destination can be reached, but by how predictably the journey can unfold. In this balance, an alternative emerges, one that bypasses the southern crossing entirely. The connection through Central America provides such an option. By passing through the Panama Canal, ships move between oceans without descending into the higher latitudes, where the forces described earlier remain active. The canal itself is a constructed passage, controlled and regulated, where movement is guided through a series of locks that raise and lower vessels between sea levels. The environment within it is defined by structure rather than open water, offering a contrast to the wide, unbounded conditions of the southern route. Choosing this path alters the geometry of the journey. Instead of curving around the lower edge of the continent, ships travel a longer distance across more temperate regions. The added length extends travel time, yet it also shifts the nature of the voyage. Conditions along this route tend to be more stable, influenced by different wind patterns and ocean behavior that do not produce the same intensity found farther south. For shipping companies, this choice becomes a calculation shaped by multiple factors: time, fuel consumption, cargo value, and vessel capability all contribute to the decision. A shorter route may reduce travel distance, but it introduces variables that can affect speed and safety. A longer route increases distance but may allow for more consistent progress, with fewer interruptions caused by changing conditions. The cost of passing through the canal itself is significant, reflecting the infrastructure required to maintain it. Fees are calculated based on vessel size and cargo, adding a direct expense to the journey. Yet this cost is weighed against the potential for delays or damage that could occur along a more demanding route. The comparison is not simply between distance and expense, but between different types of risk. Some vessels are designed to operate effectively in more challenging environments, with structures and systems suited to handle variable conditions. Others are optimized for efficiency under more stable circumstances, where maintaining a steady speed over long distances becomes the priority. The characteristics of the ship influence which route is more suitable, aligning capability with expected conditions. Cargo also plays a role in this decision. Time-sensitive goods may benefit from a route that offers greater predictability, even if it is longer. The ability to maintain a schedule can be as important as reducing travel distance. In contrast, other cargo may allow for more flexibility, making a shorter but less predictable route a viable option. Seasonal variations can further influence these choices. Conditions in different parts of the ocean change over time, affecting how routes are evaluated. A path that is favorable during one period may become less so during another, leading to adjustments in planning that reflect the evolving environment. The existence of alternative routes does not diminish the significance of the Southern Passage, but it introduces options that can be selected based on specific priorities. Each route carries its own set of characteristics, and the decision between them reflects a balance between efficiency, cost, and the nature of the conditions encountered. In this way, navigation becomes an exercise in comparison, where distance, expense, and environmental factors are considered together. The ocean offers multiple pathways, each shaped by different influences, and the choice of route determines not only how far a ship travels, but how it experiences the journey itself. Preparation for a modern crossing begins long before the vessel reaches these waters, unfolding as a series of decisions shaped by data, experience, and an understanding of how conditions may evolve. Routes are selected not only for distance, but for how they align with expected patterns of wind, current, and temperature. Timing becomes an important element, with departures planned to coincide with windows where conditions are more manageable, even if never fully stable. Expedition ships approach the passage with a design that reflects both travel and observation. Their hulls are reinforced, their systems configured to handle sustained motion, and their crews trained to operate within an environment that requires constant awareness. These vessels often carry passengers whose purpose extends beyond transport, seeking to experience the region directly. The journey becomes part of the destination, shaped by preparation that anticipates variability rather than attempting to eliminate it. Research vessels enter with a different focus, yet they rely on similar preparation. Their equipment is designed to measure, sample, and observe, often extending below the surface where conditions are less visible. Instruments are secured against motion, calibrated to function despite shifting orientation, and integrated into systems that allow data to be collected continuously. The passage becomes a site of study, where the same forces that influence navigation are also subjects of investigation. Before departure, forecasts are examined in detail, drawing from satellite observations, ocean models, and historical patterns. These forecasts provide a framework, indicating how pressure systems, wind fields, and wave conditions may develop over time. Yet they are interpreted with an understanding that variability remains. Plans are made with flexibility, allowing for adjustments as new information becomes available. Supplies and equipment are prepared with attention to redundancy and resilience. Essential systems are checked and rechecked, ensuring that they can operate under sustained stress. Loose items are secured, and spaces are organized to minimize the effects of movement. The vessel is configured not for stillness, but for continuous motion, where stability is relative rather than absolute. As the crossing begins, the planned route is followed with ongoing evaluation. Navigation systems provide precise positioning, while sensors monitor the ship's response to waves and currents. Adjustments are made to speed and heading, aligning the vessel's movement with the conditions encountered. The process is continuous, guided by both instrumentation and direct observation. Communication remains active throughout the journey. Updates from weather services are received, and information is shared between vessels when possible. This exchange contributes to a broader awareness of conditions across the region, allowing for informed decisions as the crossing progresses. The passage is experienced individually, yet it is also part of a shared environment where knowledge is distributed. For those on board, the crossing is structured by routines that adapt to the conditions. Activities are scheduled with flexibility, allowing for changes in response to movement. Safety procedures are emphasized, not as a reaction to immediate danger, but as a standard approach within an environment that requires attention to detail. The duration of the crossing varies, influenced by route, speed, and conditions. Throughout this time, the vessel remains engaged with the surrounding system, responding to forces that are not static. The experience reflects a balance between preparation and adaptation, where planning provides a foundation and ongoing adjustment shapes the outcome. In this way, crossing the passage today combines advanced technology with an enduring need to respond to the environment. Ships are better equipped, information is more accessible, and preparation is more detailed, yet the ocean retains its complexity. The journey unfolds as a collaboration between design, knowledge, and the conditions that continue to define this region. Instruments lowered into the water begin their work quietly, slipping beneath the surface where motion continues unseen. Cables extend downward, carrying sensors that measure temperature, salinity, and the movement of water at different depths. These devices remain in place or drift with the current, recording changes over time and building a picture of a system that cannot be understood from the surface alone. Scientists approach this region as part of a larger effort to observe how the ocean behaves across seasons and years. The passage, positioned within a continuous band of water that circles the planet, becomes an important location for monitoring how currents transport, heat, and influence global patterns. Measurements collected here contribute to data sets that extend far beyond the immediate surroundings, linking local observations to broader trends. One focus of this work is the study of how water masses move and interact. By tracking variations in temperature and salinity, researchers can identify distinct layers and follow their paths as they shift through the ocean. These properties act as markers, revealing how water originating in one region travels to another, carrying with it the characteristics acquired along the way. To capture this movement, scientists deploy drifting floats that adjust their depth automatically. These instruments descend to predetermined levels, remain there as they move with the current, and then rise periodically to transmit data via satellite. Over time, they create a network of observations that map the pathways of water through the passage and beyond. The information they provide contributes to an understanding of how circulation operates on a global scale. In addition to these floats, moored instruments are anchored to the seafloor, extending upward through the water column. These arrays measure changes continuously at fixed locations, offering detailed records of how conditions vary over time. The combination of drifting and stationary measurements allows for both broad coverage and precise monitoring, capturing different aspects of the system. Climate monitoring relies on this collection of data to identify patterns and detect changes. Small variations in temperature or current strength, when observed over long periods, can indicate shifts that influence larger systems. The passage becomes part of a network of observation points that together reveal how the ocean responds to changes in atmospheric conditions and global temperature. The interaction between ocean and atmosphere is a central aspect of this research. Measurements of heat exchange, wind patterns, and surface conditions contribute to models that simulate how energy moves through the system. These models are refined continuously, incorporating new data to improve their accuracy and extend their predictive capability. Understanding these processes matters because the ocean plays a significant role in regulating the planet's climate. The movement of water redistributes heat, influencing temperature patterns across different regions. Changes in circulation can alter this distribution, affecting weather systems and long-term climate behavior. Observations from the passage contribute to identifying how stable these patterns remain and how they may evolve. Research conducted here also informs studies of sea level, ice formation, and the distribution of nutrients. Each of these factors connects to broader environmental systems, linking physical processes with biological outcomes. The data collected becomes part of a larger framework used to examine how different components of the Earth system interact. The work is ongoing, with each measurement adding to a record that extends across decades. Scientists return to the region repeatedly, refining their methods and expanding their understanding. The passage remains an active site of observation, where the movement of water, the exchange of heat, and the interaction of currents continue to be studied as part of a system that influences conditions far beyond its boundaries. Change in this region does not arrive as a single event, but as a gradual adjustment that unfolds across years, carried within the same systems that have always defined it. The movement of water, the exchange of heat, and the patterns of wind continue, yet the conditions shaping them begin to shift in subtle ways. These changes accumulate, influencing how the passage behaves without altering its identity all at once. As global temperatures rise, the balance between ocean and atmosphere adjusts. Warmer air affects the surface of the ocean, altering how heat is absorbed and distributed. This influence extends downward, gradually changing temperature profiles within the water column. The difference between layers, once defined by stable gradients, may become more variable, affecting how water moves both horizontally and vertically. Ice surrounding the southern continent responds to these changes as well. Glaciers and ice shelves release fresh water into the ocean, introducing a different composition into the surrounding waters. This influx alters salinity, which in turn influences density. Because density helps determine how water sinks or rises, even small changes can modify patterns of circulation. The pathways through which water travels may shift slightly, redirecting the flow that passes through this region. The presence of fresh water also affects the formation of sea ice. Changes in the extent and duration of ice cover influence how the ocean interacts with the atmosphere above. Ice reflects sunlight, while open water absorbs it, creating differences in how heat is retained or released. As these patterns adjust, they contribute to broader changes in temperature distribution across the region. Wind patterns, shaped by temperature differences between latitudes, may also evolve. The belts of strong winds that encircle the Southern Ocean are influenced by these gradients, and as the gradients shift, the position and intensity of the winds can change. Even a small shift in these patterns can alter how energy is transferred to the ocean surface, influencing wave formation and the movement of currents. These changes do not occur in isolation. The ocean and atmosphere respond to each other, forming a system where adjustments in one part influence the rest. A shift in wind can modify currents, which then affect temperature distribution, which in turn influences the atmosphere. The passage remains embedded within this system, responding to changes that originate both locally and globally. For the living systems within these waters, the effects are tied to how conditions influence the availability of resources. Variations in temperature and circulation can affect the distribution of nutrients, shaping where and when biological productivity occurs. Species that rely on specific conditions may adjust their range, moving in response to changes that alter the environment they depend on. The overall structure of the passage, defined by its open connection between oceans, remains unchanged. The forces that move through it continue, yet their characteristics may be modified. Currents may shift slightly in speed or direction, winds may alter their paths, and the interaction between layers of water may evolve. These adjustments are part of a broader transformation that reflects changes occurring across the planet. Observation and measurement play an important role in understanding these developments. Data collected over time allows scientists to compare present conditions with those of the past, identifying trends that might otherwise remain unnoticed. Through this process, patterns emerge, revealing how the system is responding to ongoing changes. The future of the passage is therefore not a departure from what it has been, but a continuation shaped by new influences. The same processes remain in motion, carrying with them adjustments that reflect a changing climate. Within this ongoing evolution, the region continues to function as part of a global system, its behavior linked to forces that extend far beyond its immediate boundaries. It is not one force that defines this place, but the way many forces exist together, overlapping and reinforcing each other without pause. Each element, on its own, might be manageable, a single challenge that can be observed and understood. Here, they do not arrive separately. They exist at once, layered into a system that rarely settles into stillness. Movement begins with the water itself, already in motion before any immediate change appears at the surface. That motion carries energy across vast distances, arriving from beyond the horizon and continuing without interruption. It does not fade between events, but persists, creating a foundation that is never entirely quiet. Onto this foundation, other forces are added, shaping how the surface behaves moment by moment. Waves do not follow a single pattern. They intersect, shift, and rebuild, influenced by conditions that extend far beyond the visible surroundings. Their interaction creates variations that are difficult to anticipate, where height and direction change in ways that resist simple prediction. The surface becomes a place of constant adjustment, where motion is not repetitive but continuously evolving. Wind contributes its own influence, applying force across the water in a way that reinforces what is already present. It does not simply pass over the surface, but transfers energy into it, sustaining and amplifying movement. This interaction ensures that the system remains active, with little opportunity for the ocean to return to a calmer state. Beneath the surface, currents move with their own structure, sometimes aligning with what occurs above, sometimes diverging from it. Water at different depths can travel in different directions, creating a layered flow that adds complexity to the overall motion. These currents are not visible, yet they influence how the surface responds, shaping patterns that emerge from below. Temperature adds another dimension, affecting how quickly conditions can change and how the human body responds when exposed. The cold influences both the environment and those moving through it, limiting tolerance and reducing the margin for error. It does not act alone, but in combination with motion and wind, becoming part of a broader set of constraints. Visibility is often limited, shaped by atmospheric conditions that can shift without gradual transition. What appears clear can become obscured, altering perception and reducing the ability to anticipate what lies ahead. This change does not occur in isolation, but alongside the movement already present, adding another layer of uncertainty. Distance from assistance further contributes to the nature of the environment. The time required for response extends beyond immediate reach, influenced by location and conditions that affect travel. This distance becomes part of the overall system, shaping how situations unfold once they begin. Each of these factors interacts with the others, forming a network rather than a sequence. The presence of one amplifies the effect of another, creating combinations that are not easily separated. The result is not a single source of difficulty, but a continuous interaction between multiple elements that remain active together. What defines the passage is this persistence. Conditions do not need to reach extremes to become significant, because the system itself maintains a level of activity that rarely diminishes. Even moderate changes can carry weight when they occur within an environment that is already in motion. The passage remains as it is because these forces are tied to the structure of the planet, to the arrangement of land, water, and atmosphere that directs how energy moves. This structure does not shift quickly, and so the conditions it produces continue with consistency across time. In this way, The danger is not a singular event but an ongoing state, shaped by layers that do not resolve into simplicity. The ocean here does not rely on extremes to become challenging. It exists in a condition where multiple influences converge, creating a complexity that remains present, steady, and enduring. Far from the rhythms shaped by cities and coastlines, this stretch of ocean continues in its own way, guided by forces that do not pause or adjust for human passage. The systems that move through it remain uninterrupted, following patterns set long before ships began to cross its surface. Currents flow as they always have, winds circle without obstruction, and the exchange between ocean and atmosphere unfolds without regard for observation. There is a quiet continuity in this, a sense that the processes described are not temporary conditions, but enduring features of the planet itself. The passage does not become calmer with time, nor does it gradually yield to control. It remains part of a larger system that extends beyond any single location, connected to movements that circle the Earth and return again without conclusion. Across its surface and through its depths, energy continues to move, carried by water and shaped by air. The interactions remain complex, layered in ways that resist simplification. Even with detailed maps and advanced instruments, the behavior of this place is never fully reduced to certainty. Each crossing becomes part of an ongoing encounter with a system that retains its independence. What has unfolded here throughout the narrative reflects more than a single location. It reveals how different elements of the Earth interact, how geography, temperature, motion, and life come together to form environments that operate on their own terms. The passage stands as one example of this, a place where these interactions remain especially visible, where the structure of the planet expresses itself without interruption. In this setting, the idea of control becomes less relevant than the idea of understanding. Knowledge allows for preparation and adaptation, yet it does not alter the underlying processes. The ocean continues to behave according to the forces that shape it, maintaining patterns that exist whether observed or not. There are still places where this independence remains clear, where natural systems function without being reshaped or confined. The passage belongs to this category, a region where the balance between forces is maintained by the Earth itself. Its persistence offers a reminder of the scale at which these systems operate, extending beyond immediate experience into patterns that continue over time. For those who move through it, whether for travel, research, or exploration, the journey becomes part of a larger relationship with the environment. The crossing is not only a passage from one point to another, but an encounter with processes that define how the ocean exists. Each voyage adds to a collective understanding, shaped by observation and experience, yet always incomplete. As the water continues its movement, uninterrupted and consistent, the passage remains as it has been, active, complex, and open. It does not resolve into stillness, nor does it become fully predictable. Instead, it continues as part of a living system, connected to the wider patterns that shape the planet. In the quiet that follows, it is possible to reflect on this continuity, on the idea that some places remain guided by forces beyond direct control. The ocean here does not change its nature to accommodate passage, and in that constancy, it reveals something fundamental about the Earth itself. If this journey has carried you across these waters in thought, you may find yourself considering whether you would choose to cross them in reality, to experience that motion directly. And if the ocean's deeper stories continue to draw your attention, there is always more to explore, more layers to uncover in the vast and interconnected world beneath the surface.